What would you do if the man you were about to marry turned out to be an imposter, right? There at the altar, in front of everyone you love. The sun smiled warmly over the city of Iden that Saturday morning. It was the kind of day that felt like it had been handcrafted by heaven's soft breeze, cloudless sky, and a golden hue bathing the streets. In the heart of the bustling city stood Christ the Redeemer Church, its white marble walls gleaming in the light. This wasn't just a church, it was the church. If you were someone in Ibadan's elite circles, this was where your children got baptized, where your weddings happened, and where your legacy began. And today, a legacy was about to be sealed. The grounds buzzed with excitement. Long white ribbons danced in the wind. Fresh flowers overflowed from golden vases lining the aisle. Drivers in pressed uniforms opened doors for guests stepping out of luxury vehicles, Rolls-Royces, Bentleys, custom G-Wagons. Laughter and perfume floated through the air like soft incense. Inside the grand sanctuary, chandeliers sparkled above polished pews filled with Ibadan's finest, politicians, entertainers, moguls, and socialites. At the altar stood Reverend Elijah Brooks, dressed in a white robe with gold embroidery. His presence was calm, but inside, his spirit stirred. He had served at Christ the Redeemer for over 25 years, marrying hundreds of couples. He'd watched love bloom, and he'd seen deception dressed in diamonds. And today, something tugged at him. A whisper in his heart, a still, small voice. Watch closely. Standing at the altar was Marcus Grant. He looked every bit the dream groom, tall, dark-skinned, confident. His white tuxedo was tailored to perfection, and his smile charmed every woman in the room. But Reverend Brooks, sharp with age and intuition, noticed the little things. The fingers tapping against his thigh, the nervous way Marcus adjusted his cufflinks, the tightness behind the smile. Lord, the Reverend prayed silently, if there is any lie hidden here today, let the truth rise. Then came the music. The church doors opened wide, gasps rippled through the crowd. Celeste Morgan stood framed in sunlight. Her gown shimmered with thousands of tiny crystals that reflected the light like stars. A long silk veil flowed behind her, held by two flower girls in pink tulle. Her father, Raymond Morgan, the real estate magnate, stood proudly beside her. Celeste was grace incarnate. She walked with the poise of someone raised with wealth, but not spoiled by it. Her chin lifted not in arrogance, but in quiet strength. The congregation rose to their feet. Some snapped photos discreetly, others simply stared. To everyone watching, this was the picture of love fulfilled. A childhood friendship blossomed into romance, a reunion, a dream. But Reverend Elijah watched Marcus's eyes. They weren't focused on Celeste. They darted toward the door, then to the crowd, then back again. He smiled, yes, but not like a man overwhelmed with joy. More like someone praying the clock would move faster. Celeste reached the altar. Marcus took her hand. Cameras flashed. Dearly beloved, Reverend Elijah began, his voice steady. We are gathered here today to witness the union of Celeste Morgan and Marcus Grant in holy matrimony. His words flowed like silk. He had said them many times. But even as the vows approached, that same quiet warning hummed in his spirit. He watched, and he waited. Because weddings, he knew, don't just unite people. They sometimes reveal who they truly are. And while the city cheered a love story, the Reverend sensed a storm quietly forming at the edges of a perfect day. This wasn't just a wedding. It was the beginning of something that would shake the foundations of everyone in that room, especially the bride, especially the groom, and especially the man standing in God's pulpit, watching the truth rise like heat from the altar. The days leading up to the wedding felt like a dream for Celeste. Lavish gown fittings, handwritten notes from Marcus, candlelit dinners under the stars. He made her laugh, made her blush, made her believe. Everyone said, "He's perfect." And she believed them. But perfection often hides its cracks behind the glow. One night, 3 weeks before the wedding, Celeste had surprised Marcus at his apartment. She arrived with his favorite takeout, only to find him sitting alone in the dark, his phone glowing in his hand. He startled when she entered. "You okay?" she asked. He smiled a little too quickly. "Just tired," he said, locking his screen. She brushed it off. Trust was love's first rule, wasn't it? But Reverend Elijah Brooks had spent decades watching people make vows. And he knew it wasn't always the obvious lies that broke a marriage. Sometimes it was the details, the kind that didn't add up. During premarital counseling, Celeste lit up with every question. Marcus was charming, but vague. One moment stuck with Reverend Elijah. He had asked, "What childhood festival do you remember most?" Marcus smiled. "The Yam Festival. We always celebrated in April." Celeste nodded beside him, eyes shining. But the Reverend frowned just slightly. "The Yam Festival in Ibadan? It's always in August. It was subtle." But subtle things, to a pastor, are like alarms on silent. Then came another moment. After church one Sunday, a family friend had asked Marcus, "You remember Mama Titi's Akara stand near your old place?" Marcus laughed. Of course, her roasted yams were legendary. The group chuckled, but Reverend Elijah did not. Mama Titi never sold yams. Her Akarabian cakes were the stuff of legends in that part of town. Another crack. Still, the Reverend said nothing, but he prayed, and he watched. Then came the final rehearsal. That's when Marcus approached him quietly. "Pastor," Marcus said with a polite smile, "can we maybe skip the speak now or forever hold your peace part of the ceremony? It's outdated and honestly, we'd just like to avoid unnecessary drama." Celeste had teased him. "What, are you hiding a secret fiancé?" Marcus had laughed, but too sharply. "Of course not," he snapped. That was the moment Reverend Elijah decided he wouldn't alter a single word. "My son," he said, "tradition protects truth. We'll keep it." Marcus had nodded, but his eyes were tight. And now, standing at the altar, that moment returned like a slow echo. Reverend Elijah looked at him. "If anyone here knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." Silence. A beat. 2. And then a scraping sound. A chair dragging slowly across the marble floor. From the third row, an elderly man stood up. His Agbada robe was deep brown, and his face bore the weight of years. But his voice was strong when he pointed toward Marcus and said, "That man is not my nephew." Gasps rippled through the sanctuary. Celeste turned sharply. Marcus froze. And Reverend Elijah stepped forward with calm eyes, steady hands, and a heart that had known all along. The storm had arrived, and the truth was rising. The moment the old man's voice echoed through the sanctuary, the atmosphere shifted. 1 second before, the church had been a scene of perfect celebration. Silk gowns, soft candlelight, and a couple on the brink of forever. Now, tension crackled like a wire about to snap. "That man is not my nephew," the elder had said, steady, unshaking. Reverend Elijah Brooks kept his expression calm, but inwardly his heart tightened. Celeste's eyes were wide, searching Marcus's face for reassurance. But all she saw was panic, barely concealed, thin as glass. Marcus turned toward the Reverend and attempted a soft chuckle. "Pastor, please. That's just an old man confused by time. My family hasn't seen me in years." "He probably—" The Reverend raised a gentle hand. "Mr. Grant, let us bring peace to this moment with clarity." He turned to the elder. "Sir, may I have your name?" The old man stepped forward with dignity. "Walter Grant," he said. "I am the brother of Isaiah Grant's father. And Isaiah was the real Femi. Gasps rippled through the crowd again, louder this time. A few guests turned to each other, whispering. Others simply stared in silence. Celeste blinked slowly. "Isaiah?" she whispered. Walter's voice trembled just slightly, but his message was resolute. "Isaiah died 3 years ago overseas. We buried him quietly, but this man standing before you, he is not him." Marcus's jaw clenched. Celeste slowly pulled her hand out of his. "I'm going to ask one question," Reverend Elijah said, stepping slightly closer to Marcus, his voice low but resolute. "Walter, you mentioned a birthmark." Walter nodded. "Isaiah was born with a small birthmark behind his right ear. Shaped like a star, faint but unmistakable." The Reverend turned to Marcus. "Son," he said quietly, "please, for the sake of truth, show us." A beat of silence. Then Marcus spoke too quickly. "I had it removed years ago, cosmetic surgery. I didn't like how it looked." Murmurs broke out again, skeptical this time. "Who removes a birthmark from behind the ear?" someone muttered. Reverend Elijah's gaze never wavered. "Even surgery leaves a scar. Let us see." Marcus stood frozen, his hands limp at his sides. Then, with visible reluctance, he reached behind his ear and pulled his collar down slightly. The skin was smooth, too smooth. There was nothing. No mark, no scar, nothing. The silence that followed was loud. Celeste stepped back. "No," she whispered. "No." Marcus turned to her. "Celeste, I can explain. She shook her head. "Please don't lie again." Reverend Elijah stepped between them gently, as if shielding her. "My son," he said to Marcus, "if there is truth in you, now is your time to speak it. Because this altar was never meant to host performance. Only promise." For the first time that morning, Marcus's shoulders slumped. He exhaled one long, broken breath and closed his eyes. "I'm not Isaiah," he said quietly. "My name is Marcus Grant." No one moved. No one breathed. "I knew Isaiah in college," he continued. "We were roommates. I was broke, from nowhere. He came from wealth, old money. He didn't have a care in the world." Reverend Elijah said nothing. He just listened. Marcus's voice cracked. "When he died, I was the only one there. No one came for him. No family, no funeral. Just silence. And something inside me snapped." He looked at Celeste now, his eyes pleading. "I read his messages. I saw the photos of you two as kids. I knew what he was planning to reconnect. He talked about you like you were some kind of miracle." Celeste's expression didn't change. She just stood still, broken, dignified. "I was tired," Marcus said. "Tired of being poor, tired of being invisible. I thought, maybe if I stepped into his shoes, just for a while." He laughed bitterly. "But then you were more than I expected. And by the time I realized I loved you, the lie was already too big." Reverend Elijah lowered his head in prayer. Celeste spoke finally, her voice quiet. "You didn't love me. You loved my world." "My name." "No," Marcus insisted. "It started that way, yes, but then it became real." "And yet," she said, voice stronger now, "you would have married me today and never said a word." That was the final nail. Marcus stepped down from the altar, slowly, his face hollow, his hands at his sides. Security guards, discreetly waiting at Reverend Elijah's request, stepped forward. They didn't grab him. They didn't raise their voices. They simply flanked him and began leading him out. No one clapped. No one cheered. The church remained still, just a sea of silent witnesses. Marcus paused at the door, turned once more to Celeste. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say. Reverend Elijah stepped back to the pulpit, hands shaking slightly. He looked at the congregation, the stunned crowd, the mother dabbing her eyes, the old man who had spoken truth, and the woman at the altar whose wedding had just unraveled in front of the world. With a voice firm but kind, he said, "This is a house of truth. And sometimes truth comes with pain, but better pain now than heartbreak forever." He turned to Celeste. "My dear," he said gently, "what would you like to do?" She didn't speak. Not right away. She reached up, removed the veil from her hair, and let it fall. Then she turned to the crowd, lifted her chin, and walked back down the aisle alone, but unbroken. The organ didn't play, the bells didn't ring, but there was power in her silence. And the hush that followed her felt almost holy, because though she had lost her fairy tale, she had reclaimed something far more precious, her truth, her dignity, her name. The headlines the next morning were merciless. Heiress abandoned at the altar, groom exposed as imposter. Fake identity, real betrayal, the wedding that shook a city. Paparazzi camped outside the Morgan estate. Paparazzi camped. Gossip blogs devoured every frame of Celeste's walk down the aisle, not toward marriage, but away from it. But inside the grand family home, there was no chaos, no shouting, just silence. Celeste sat by her bedroom window, still in her wedding robe, her hair loose, makeup faded. In her lap was a steaming mug of tea she hadn't touched. Outside, life moved on, but inside her chest, the world felt frozen. The betrayal wasn't just public, it was intimate. She had believed Marcus, loved him, defended him. She had let him into the deepest parts of her world, and now those spaces felt violated. Her father, Raymond Morgan, knocked gently and stepped in. He didn't speak right away, just sat beside her, placing a warm hand on her shoulder. "I don't care about the scandal," he said softly. "I care about my daughter." Celeste leaned her head against his arm like she had when she was a little girl. "I thought I knew him, Dad." "I know. I thought I was smart enough to see it. You are. But I didn't. And now the whole world knows I didn't." Raymond squeezed her hand. "The world doesn't get to define your strength. You do." Celeste didn't respond, but she held his hand a little tighter. Later that evening, she went to see Reverend Elijah Brooks. The church was quiet, the candles dim. He was still in his study, flipping through a worn Bible, glasses perched low on his nose. When she entered, he looked up and smiled the same kind, knowing smile she had seen at the altar. "I'm not sure why I came," she said, sitting down. "You came," he replied, "because truth is heavy. And people often need help carrying it." She let out a tired breath. "I don't even know where to start." "Start with how you feel." She paused, then said, "Foolish." "Why?" "Because I missed it." All the signs, the stories that didn't match, the moments he looked away. "I saw them, but I wanted the fairy tale too badly." Reverend Elijah leaned forward. "Celeste, we don't fall for people because we're foolish. We fall because we hope." He let that hang in the air before continuing. "You hoped Marcus was good. You hoped he was who he said he was. And hope, real hope, is never something to be ashamed of." Her eyes shimmered. He continued, "You didn't fail because you believed in love. He failed because he used your love as a mask." Celeste looked down. Her voice was quiet. "What am I supposed to do now?" The Reverend smiled gently. "Now? Now you rebuild?" "Not from scratch, but from truth." That night, for the first time in 2 days, Celeste slept. No sedatives, no tears. Just sleep. Over the next few weeks, Celeste stayed out of the spotlight. She declined interviews, ignored tabloids, and focused on something else entirely: clarity. She reviewed every message Marcus had sent, every word, every photo. She met with lawyers, with security consultants, even a private investigator, but not for revenge, for understanding. "I don't want to live looking over my shoulder," she told her father, "but I do want to know how a man like that could build such a perfect lie." It turned out Marcus had used fragments of Isaiah Grant's real identity, weaving them into a fabricated persona. The details were just enough to pass casual scrutiny and just fake enough to unravel under pressure. Celeste wrote every discovery down in a journal, not for publication, for herself. Every truth she uncovered became another thread in a tapestry of healing. 3 months later, she hosted a small gathering at the Morgan Foundation, her family's charitable arm. Only women were invited. Mostly young, mostly quiet, all survivors of deception, manipulation, or betrayal. The event was simple: round tables, tea, and a microphone passed hand to hand. When it was Celeste's turn to speak, she stood at the front of the room and took a deep breath. "I was almost married 3 months ago," she began, "to a man who wasn't who he claimed to be." A few gasps, a few knowing nods. I stood in front of hundreds of people, believing I was about to start a new life. What I didn't know was that he had borrowed someone else's name, someone else's story just to stand beside me. She paused. "I thought that day ruined me, but it didn't. It revealed me." The room was still. "I realized something after the ceremony," she said. "You don't lose value just because someone else couldn't recognize it. Their deception doesn't erase your worth." One girl wiped her eyes. Celeste smiled, but it wasn't polished or posed. It was real. Sometimes we think strength looks like never falling, but strength is standing up when the world expects you to disappear. That line would later be quoted in magazines. But Celeste never meant it for headlines. She meant it for healing. That same week, she returned to Christ the Redeemer, not in a wedding gown, but in jeans and a white blouse. No photographers. No audience. She sat beside Reverend Elijah after Sunday service. "I think I'm ready to forgive him," she said. The Reverend looked at her, not surprised. "You don't have to forget," he said. "Forgiveness doesn't mean he deserves peace. It means you do." Celeste nodded slowly, and for the first time in months, she smiled not to prove she was okay, but because, finally, she was. It was a quiet Wednesday afternoon when Celeste first met Ethan Monroe. She had planned to spend the day reviewing grant applications at the Light Foundation, the nonprofit she'd started to empower women recovering from betrayal, fraud, and emotional trauma. But after 3 hours behind a desk, her mind wandered. The numbers blurred, the words lost weight. So she left the office and walked to a nearby community health center, a partner organization she often supported anonymously. She didn't wear her designer blazers or heels that day, just jeans, a soft grey sweater, and sneakers. Hair pulled back. No makeup. She didn't want to be seen, but someone saw her anyway. She was carrying a box of donated books for the children's wing when she stumbled slightly, and the box tipped forward. A pair of steady hands caught it. "You okay?" a warm voice said. She looked up into dark brown eyes. Soft, steady, kind. He was tall, maybe late 30s, dressed in simple scrubs and sneakers. A volunteer badge hung loosely around his neck. "I'm fine," she said, slightly breathless. "Just underestimated how heavy it was," he smiled. "They usually look lighter than they feel. Happens to me every week." She laughed genuinely. It felt strange and yet good. "I'm Ethan," he said, offering his hand. "Celeste." His expression didn't change. No flash of recognition, no nervous glance, no shift in tone. Just kindness. That alone made her pause. They carried the box together to the front desk. As they walked, he said casually, "You're not one of the regulars around here." She shrugged. "I help where I can. Books for kids? They were mine. Some are new." "Thought they deserve better homes." He nodded thoughtfully. "You don't look like someone who keeps much for herself." Celeste tilted her head. "Is that a compliment or a judgment?" He chuckled. "Definitely a compliment. People who give without needing applause, they're rare." They finished their task and stood awkwardly for a moment by the hallway. "Well," she said. "Thanks for the save," he smiled. "Any time." Then, before she turned to leave, he added, "You should come back sometime. Story hours every Friday." "We could use another reader." She blinked. "You think I'd be good at that?" He shrugged. "You've got the eyes of someone who knows how to speak gently." She smiled. "I'll think about it." And then she left. But the next Friday, she came back. At story hour, Celeste read The Velveteen Rabbit to a group of 10 children sitting cross-legged on a soft rug. She didn't expect to cry, but when she reached the part about becoming real, about how it happens slowly, painfully, and only when you're truly loved, her voice wavered. The children didn't notice, but Ethan, sitting quietly in the corner, did. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask. Afterward, he just walked beside her to the parking lot. "That book's heavier than it looks," he said gently. "Yeah," she replied, her throat tight. "It is." He looked at her, long and steady. "You're not the only one who's had to learn how to become real." That night, they had tea on a bench outside the health center. He told her about his sister, who had survived an abusive relationship, and inspired him to leave corporate life behind and pursue work that mattered. She told him cautiously about the wedding, not the headlines, just the heart of it. "I believed in something that never existed," she said, "and I almost signed my life to a ghost." Ethan didn't look away. Instead, he said, "You didn't believe in a ghost." "You believed in love. That's not weakness. That's courage." Celeste exhaled. And just like that, something inside her softened. Over the next few weeks, they met again. Once for coffee. Once at a neighborhood cleanup event. Once just to walk around the park and not talk about anything important. Ethan never pushed. He never hovered. He didn't flinch when she was quiet. And that, more than anything, made her lean in. He didn't see her as a woman to be fixed, or pitied, or saved. He saw her as whole, even when she didn't feel that way yet. One afternoon, they sat on the church steps outside Christ the Redeemer after a local outreach event. The sun was dipping low, and the sky blushed pink with early evening light. Ethan looked at her and said, "I know what people say about falling in love, but I think sometimes it's less about falling and more about unfolding." She looked at him, her heart slower, steadier. "What if I don't unfold all at once?" He smiled. "Then I'll wait." Silence. Comfortable. Unrushed. Celeste reached for his hand, not as a declaration, not yet, but as a beginning. And for the first time in a very long time, it didn't feel like she was stepping off a cliff. It felt like walking through a door she had built with her own 2 hands. One moment at a time. The first time Ethan tried to kiss her, Celeste turned away, not because she didn't want to, but because a voice inside her whispered, "What if this is just another mask?" They were sitting in his kitchen, sipping hot cider after an evening volunteer shift. The house was small, lived in, not luxurious, no butlers or grand staircases, just warmth. A soft blue couch, a candle that smelled like cinnamon, an old record playing faint jazz in the background. They were laughing about something a toddler at the clinic who had decided the stethoscope was a magic wand when the moment shifted. Their laughter faded into quiet. Ethan reached across the table, gently brushed a curl from her cheek, and leaned in. But before their lips met, Celeste pulled back. Ethan stopped immediately. She didn't apologize. He didn't ask for one. Instead, he nodded and said, "You don't have to explain." She appreciated that more than he knew, but she explained anyway. "I thought I was healed," she said, fingers wrapped around her mug. "But there are still pieces of me that flinch. Pieces I didn't know were broken until I felt something good again." Ethan sat back. His eyes didn't fill with disappointment, just understanding. Real healing, he said, isn't a finish line. It's a rhythm. You'll know when it's time. I'll be here when it is. No pressure. No agenda. Just presence. That night, Celeste walked home with a lump in her throat and an ache in her chest, not from pain, but from gratitude. She wasn't used to a love that waited. They saw each other more often after that, sometimes for long walks in the park, sometimes over coffee, sometimes in shared silence as they sorted clothes at the donation center. The world still knew her as the heiress betrayed at the altar. Strangers whispered, photographers still lurked, but Ethan... He never asked about the tabloids. Instead, he asked, "What makes you feel most like yourself? What was your favorite book as a kid? What's something you miss about who you used to be?" Their conversations were not flashy. They were slow, honest, safe. Celeste began to laugh more, to rest more, to breathe, but healing is never linear. And it was one text message that shook her. It came on a rainy afternoon as she sat on the floor of her living room, organizing thank you notes from donors. A name flashed across her screen. Marcus. She stared at it for a full minute before opening it. "I heard about your foundation. I'm proud of you. I'm sorry for everything. I hope you're happy. No request. No manipulation. Just words." And yet, her fingers trembled. She didn't reply. Instead, she called Reverend Elijah. He picked up on the second ring. "I got a message from Marcus," she said. Silence. "Do I need to forgive him?" "For real." The Reverend didn't rush his answer. "Forgiveness," he said, "is not for him. It's for you." She swallowed. "I don't want him to think I condone what he did." "And you don't have to," he said gently. "Forgiveness doesn't require closeness. It just releases the weight. You can let go and still walk away." She nodded slowly. "I'll delete it," she said, "but not because I'm running. Because I'm done carrying it." Later that evening, she went to see Ethan. She didn't say anything, just walked into his kitchen, barefoot and quiet, and wrapped her arms around him. He held her without asking, and when she finally pulled back, she looked him in the eyes and said, "You're not the one I'm afraid of." He waited. "I'm afraid of who I used to be," she whispered. "The girl who believed lies because they sounded like love." Ethan's voice was steady. "Then let's not build anything that sounds like love. Let's build something that acts like it." That night, for the first time, she let him kiss her. And it felt like truth. Months passed. Their bond deepened not in fireworks, but in rhythm. Ethan never showed up with grand gestures. Instead, he brought coffee on long days. He reminded her to eat. He remembered her mother's birthday. Celeste wasn't used to consistency, but it was consistency that rebuilt her. They celebrated small wins: a new grant approved, a mother reunited with her child, a student who graduated with honors. Each joy was shared, not spotlighted. And every time Celeste looked at Ethan, she felt her past getting quieter. One Sunday afternoon, as they folded flyers for a local event, Ethan looked up and said, "Celeste, I know you don't want labels, and I'm not asking for one." She paused. "But when you're ready," he continued, "I'd like to build something more intentional. With you. At your pace. No pressure." Celeste looked at him, this man with calloused hands and gentle eyes, and smiled. "I think," she said softly, "I'm ready." He reached across the table, took her hand, and didn't let go. And as the sun poured through the windows, lighting up their joined fingers, Celeste Morgan, once betrayed, once broken, knew this wasn't just the next chapter. It was the real beginning. Celeste stood in the middle of her kitchen, staring at the envelope in her hand. It was elegant, heavy stock paper, gold seal. The kind of invitation meant to impress. She turned it over slowly. Her name, Miss Celeste Morgan, was written in sharp calligraphy. Her stomach tightened. It was from the Grant family, not Marcus. His family. The same people who had once shaken her hand with forced smiles, posed for photos, and offered polite congratulations. The same people who had gone quiet after the wedding debacle. Vanished. Now they wanted her to attend a charity gala, in honor of Isaiah Grant's life and legacy. Celeste sat down slowly, the chair creaking beneath her. A legacy built on a man who was gone, a name that had been stolen, and a family that had said nothing when it mattered most. She wasn't angry, not anymore, but she was wary. She tucked the invitation into a drawer and didn't mention it to anyone. Not yet. That evening, she had dinner with Ethan on his back porch. It had become their ritual, quiet meals under the string lights, shared without fuss or phones. But something in her was off, distant. Ethan noticed. He always did. "You're quiet tonight," he said gently. She didn't lie. She never did with him. "I got an invitation," she said. "From Marcus's family." He didn't flinch. "What for?" "A gala, to honor the real Isaiah Grant." Ethan's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "And you thinking about going?" She shrugged. "I don't know. Part of me wants to show them I'm fine. That I've moved on. That they don't get to bury me with his shame. And the other part? Wants nothing to do with them." He nodded. Then, after a pause, said, "Do whatever gives you peace." "Not power, not payback, peace." She looked at him. "Sometimes I think you're too wise to be real." He smiled. "My grandma was a preacher." In the end, she went. Not to make a statement, but because Reverend Elijah, when she brought it to him, had said, "Isaiah's name was never yours to protect, but your strength in the face of it is." So she went. Alone. She wore a sleek black dress, no sparkle, no theatrics. Her curls were pinned up, her makeup was soft, understated. She walked into the ballroom not as a woman who had been humiliated at the altar, but as a woman who had survived it. The whispers started almost instantly. "That's her. She looks even better now. I heard she started a foundation." She didn't flinch. She nodded politely, smiled when necessary, kept moving. At the center of the ballroom stood Marcus's mother, elegant, tall, dressed in navy silk. Her expression flickered the moment she saw Celeste. But she approached. "Celeste," she said coolly, "thank you for coming." Celeste tilted her head. "Thank you for inviting me." A long pause. "I hope you know," the woman continued, "we didn't know what Marcus was doing. He kept us out of it." Celeste didn't react. "I don't need you to apologize for him," she said calmly. "But I do need you to stop pretending none of it happened." Another pause. Then the woman nodded. "Fair. That was it. No drama, no confrontation, just truth." Celeste didn't stay long. She said her goodbyes, stepped outside, and exhaled. It was done. And for the first time since the day she walked away from that altar, the past felt behind her. Not chasing, not clinging. Just done. The next day, she found Ethan fixing a shelf in the children's reading room. He looked up, dusty and smiling. "How'd it go?" She kissed him before answering. Soft, certain. Then whispered, "I'm ready." He smiled. Ready for what? To stop waiting for the past to apologize. She stepped closer. Ready for something real. Slow, honest. He set the screwdriver down and took her hands, then said what he'd been carrying in his heart for months. "I love you, Celeste." She didn't blink. "I know," she said, "and I love you too." And just like that, the girl who had once been left at the altar, the woman who had rebuilt herself piece by piece, finally chose not just healing, but hope. Not just safety, but love. And this time, she wasn't falling. She was rising. Fall arrived quietly that year. The leaves turned gold in the park where Celeste often walked. The air was crisp, just cold enough for her to pull her coat a little tighter and wrap her scarf twice. It had been nearly a year since the wedding that never was, a year since her world had cracked wide open. And here she was whole. Not the same, but whole. She now taught a community course every other weekend at the local library, called Reclaiming Worth, Stories of Women Who Rose. It was never meant to be therapy, but it often turned into it. Women cried, women laughed, women healed, and Ethan showed up, not just for her, but with her. Every class, he'd quietly stack chairs, hand out notebooks, refill the coffee station, all without asking, all without needing to be noticed. One day, after class, Celeste found him talking with a woman in her 60s who'd just shared a deeply painful story. He wasn't giving advice. He was just listening. That night, she told him she wanted to grow old with someone who listened like that. Ethan smiled. "I'd like to be that someone," he said. She looked up from her tea. "Are you proposing?" He chuckled. "Not yet. I don't have a ring or a speech. Or a plan." "Good," she said, "because I don't want a plan. I want presents." The real proposal came on a Tuesday. They were walking home from the grocery store. It had rained earlier, just enough to make the sidewalks smell like wet earth and memory. Ethan was holding 2 bags of apples, and Celeste had a baguette tucked under one arm. They passed the park bench where they'd first talked for hours that spring. He paused. "Sit with me a minute?" She looked at the sky. "We'll get soaked. It's just mist." She rolled her eyes but sat anyway. He set the bags down, reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. No build-up. No crowd, no theatrics, just this. "Celeste Morgan, I don't want to rescue you. I don't want to impress you. I just want to build quiet, meaningful, honest days with you. One after the other. Until we forget how we started, only that we never stopped." He opened the box. The ring wasn't flashy. It was a simple, delicate band with a tiny stone in the center. It looked like something passed down from a grandmother, not bought from a catalogue. "I don't want to be your fairy tale," he said. "I just want to be your safe place." Celeste blinked, slowly, then smiled. Not because she was surprised, but because it felt right. She reached for the ring and slid it on herself, and said the only word that mattered, yes. They didn't announce it. No grand post, no engagement photos. Just a soft text to Reverend Elijah. "We'd like you to officiate a wedding soon. Just us, just love." "Let us know when you're free," he replied instantly. "Every day is open when it's love like this." They married on a Sunday morning in the garden behind the church. 10 guests. Fold-out chairs. A bouquet made from wildflowers. Celeste picked herself. She wore a simple white dress, no veil, no heels. Ethan wore navy slacks and a linen shirt rolled at the sleeves. There were no flower girls, no bridal parties, no catered dinners. But there was music. Soft. Acoustic. Sung by a young girl Celeste had mentored. There was laughter, real and unfiltered, as Ethan fumbled over his vows and had to start over. There were tears not from drama, but from decades of heartbreak, healing, and finding home. Reverend Elijah's prayer at the end was short. "May you never have to pretend to be okay in each other's arms." And with that, they kissed. Not for the cameras, not for the guests, but for themselves. That evening, they sat on their back porch, barefoot, drinking cider, and watching the sun go down. "I never imagined a wedding like that," Celeste said. Ethan grinned. "Me neither."
but I'll take it over fireworks and fancy plates any day. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Do you think this is what people mean when they say happily ever after? No, he said softly. This is what they mean when they say finally home. And there, under a sky slowly turning lavender, two people who had once been strangers sat in silence.
Not needing to be fixed, not needing to prove anything, just grateful, just whole, just together. The honeymoon wasn't a flight to Greece or a villa in Tuscany. It was 3 days off-grid at a borrowed lake cabin in Vermont. No Wi-Fi, no phones. Just Ethan, Celeste, a fireplace, and the sound of autumn leaves brushing against the windows. On their second night, they sat curled up under a blanket, a deck of cards between them, and 2 mugs of hot cocoa balanced on a crate they were using as a coffee table. Celeste studied him between hands.
You know, she said, no one ever tells you how quiet love can be. Ethan smiled. That's the best part. They didn't need to talk about their wedding, or the past, or the future. The stillness between them was enough, but when they returned home, life as it always does showed up. A week after the wedding, Celeste received an email from a major non-profit in DC offering her a full-time leadership role. She'd been consulting with them casually for months. They were expanding nationally and wanted her to run the East Coast division. It was a dream offer, more reach, more impact, more women served, but it also meant relocating and long hours and stepping away from the little community she and Ethan had built together. She stared at the email for almost an hour before telling him. I want it, she said finally. But I'm scared of what it means for us. Ethan was quiet for a long time. Then, are you asking for permission or partnership? She blinked. What's the difference? If you're asking me to tell you what to do, I won't. If you're asking me to walk beside you while you do it, I'm already lacing up my boots. She laughed, then sighed. I don't want to lose what we have. You won't, he said gently. But you might have to fight to protect it. They made a plan. Celeste would accept the offer on a 1-year contract. Ethan would stay in their city, keeping his volunteer work and part-time health center position. They'd visit every other weekend, meet in the middle once a month, keep things simple. Stay connected. They thought they were ready, but the first month was hard. They missed dinner conversations, grocery store runs, Sunday mornings in bed with no alarm. They started texting more than talking. And one night, when Celeste called and Ethan didn't pick up, too tired after a double shift, she cried. Not out of anger, but because she was afraid their story was becoming just another almost. When they saw each other again, 2 weeks later, they didn't pretend. They sat on a park bench halfway between their cities, holding coffee cups and staring at the pond. This is hard, Celeste said. Ethan nodded. It is. She reached for his hand. I didn't get married to live separate lives. Neither did I. So what do we do? Ethan turned toward her. We remember that distance doesn't have to be absence, but we have to make space. Not just in our schedules, in our minds. She looked at him. What does that mean? It means when I'm at the clinic and something funny happens, I pause and text you. When you're at a meeting and something frustrates you, you call me, even if you only have 5 minutes. It means we stop waiting for the perfect time. We make the time. Celeste nodded slowly. And in that moment, they both knew. Love wasn't about ease. It was about intention. They made changes. Ethan started sending handwritten letters 1 a week. Celeste started recording voice memos on her walk to work and sending them instead of texts. They picked one show to watch together, syncing up once a week on video call. They missed things, they got tired, but they kept showing up. And over time, something happened. They got stronger. Not in romance, in resilience, not in fireworks, in follow-through. Love stopped being a spark. It became a rhythm. 6 months later, Celeste's contract was coming up for renewal. She was offered an even bigger role, national director, but this time she said no. Not because she couldn't do it, but because she realized something standing in the middle of Union Station on a random Tuesday. The most important work she'd ever do wasn't on a stage or in a strategy meeting. It was at home. It was learning how to love someone in real time. She came back, not as a retreat, as a return to the life she was choosing, to the man she was building it with. She took on a smaller project, more local, more personal. One where she could mentor young women face to face and still make it home in time for dinner on the porch. Ethan greeted her with his signature half-smile and a kiss on the cheek. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. "I don't want to spend my life chasing applause. I want to spend it making meaning." He wrapped his arms around her, and as the wind blew through the leaves above them, they stood there quiet and rooted. Not perfect, but planted. It had been 2 years since the wedding that never happened. 1 year since Celeste said yes to a quiet ring on a misty sidewalk. 6 months since she turned down a national title to come home. And now it was Saturday morning. The kind where sunlight danced on hardwood floors. The kind where the coffee pot sang before anyone spoke. The kind where peace wasn't a goal. It was the atmosphere. Celeste sat by the kitchen window, cradling her tea, watching Ethan out back. He was wearing that old navy sweatshirt. She loved the one with the sleeves pushed up and a hole near the wrist. He was planting basil in the garden bed, humming something off-key. She smiled. It wasn't grand. It was real. That afternoon, they hosted a small community dinner. 10 guests, foldable chairs, big bowls of pasta, no place cards. Ethan grilled vegetables. Celeste passed out cloth napkins from her grandmother's drawer. Neighbors came. Friends. A few women from Celeste's mentorship group. A retired nurse who had helped deliver Ethan when he was born. No one was trying to impress anyone. People told stories. Kids played with sidewalk chalk. Someone brought peach cobbler. The sun dipped slowly behind the trees, and as laughter floated across the yard, Celeste sat beside Ethan on the steps and whispered, "This is the life I didn't even know to dream of." He looked at her. "You think we'll ever want more?" She paused. Thought, then smiled. "We'll want more moments like this." "Not more stuff," he nodded, and that was it. No drama. No decisions, just clarity. The next morning, Celeste opened her inbox to find a message from a national news outlet. They wanted to do a feature, not on the scandal, not on Marcus. On her. From betrayal to becoming, a conversation with Celeste Morgan. She forwarded it to Ethan with a single line. "What do you think?" He wrote back in seconds. "I think your story is a light, but make sure the story they tell is the one you're proud to own." She thought about it all day. And that night, after brushing her teeth and folding laundry, she said yes. But only under one condition. The interview would take place at her home. On her terms, with no makeup team, no edits, no pre-approved questions. They agreed. 2 weeks later, a soft-spoken journalist sat in Celeste's living room, recording. She didn't ask about Marcus. She asked about healing. "What did it take," the journalist asked, "to love again after what you went through?" Celeste thought for a long time before answering. "It took unlearning everything I thought love needed to be." She sipped her tea. "I used to think love was about excitement, grand gestures, being chosen. Now I know real love is about showing up, even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's ordinary." The journalist smiled. "How do you define love now?" Celeste looked out the window, where Ethan was painting the front fence. "Love is the hand that reaches for yours, even when you're not reaching back yet." The article went viral, but Celeste didn't care about the numbers.
What she cared about were the letters that followed, dozens, then hundreds. From women, from widows, from divorcees, from single mums, from women who had never been married at all, but had been broken by something or someone. One letter said, "Thank you for showing us that a life can bloom after the ruin." Another said, "I'm not ready to love again, but I'm ready to believe that maybe it's still possible." Celeste answered each one personally, not with advice, but with honesty. One evening, months later, she stood in her kitchen stirring soup when Ethan walked in holding a white envelope. He looked stunned. "You okay?" she asked. He handed her the envelope. It was from Marcus. She opened it slowly. Inside, a check, large, made out to the Light Foundation. No note, just a signature. She stared at it for a long moment, then looked at Ethan. "What do you think?" He shrugged. "I think money can be clean, even if the hands that held it weren't." She chuckled. "That's a very Reverend Elijah thing to say. I'm quoting him directly." She placed the check on the counter. "We'll use it," she said quietly, "for the girls. They deserve the resources." And that was that. No bitterness, no power play. Just a choice. To move forward. On their third wedding anniversary, Celeste and Ethan didn't throw a party. They didn't go away. They stayed home, made pancakes, watched old movies, took a nap in the middle of the day. At one point, Celeste leaned over and said, "I think this is the love I was always meant for." Ethan kissed her forehead. "The love that's not loud, but never leaves." She looked around their little house full of second-hand books, fresh basil, and memories not posted but lived. And for the first time in a long time, she felt it not just in her mind, but in her bones. She was free. Not because her life was perfect, but because she had stopped waiting for someone else to write her story. She was writing it herself. And the title? Home. What Celeste's story reminds us about love, loss, and living again. At any age, betrayal cuts deep, but healing, when chosen with intention, can go even deeper. Celeste Morgan's story isn't about a wedding that fell apart. It's about a woman who refused to let that moment define the rest of her life. For older audiences who've lived through their share of heartbreaks, disappointments, or even quiet loneliness, her journey offers a gentle reminder. It's never too late to begin again, and this time, on your own terms. Her path wasn't loud or dramatic. It was layered with small decisions to forgive, to grow, to trust slowly, to choose peace over pride. Through Ethan, she didn't find someone to rescue her, but someone to walk beside her. The greatest takeaway: real love doesn't rush, it listens, it shows up. And it gives you room to breathe. In a world obsessed with noise and spectacle, Celeste's story whispers a timeless truth. The most beautiful lives aren't built in moments of perfection. They're built in the quiet choices to try again.